How's it going? So this is a little different video for my channel. I thought I would review the new Iron Maiden album. I was pretty excited when I heard that they had done a new album because it had been a while since the Book of Souls. And actually I saw them, I guess 2 summers ago now, before the pandemic hit, on tour. So that was a really good show. Yeah, a little bit about me. I'm a huge Iron Maiden fan. So people that know me know that. But probably if you watch this channel, you may not know that because I talk mostly about film music and my involvement with that. But actually, I started playing drums probably around 82, 83. And I had seen the Run to the Hills video. And I immediately went out and got the album. Because that was the beginning of MTV. And they kind of showed a lot of different stuff together. So that kind of stood out to me. I got into the back catalog at that point, the 2 previous albums. But then I would say my friend got Peace of Mind on record, and I went over to his house, and he dropped the needle on it, and then it was kind of like a mind-blowing experience, especially I just started playing drums, and I heard like Where Eagles Dare, which is a great drum track, just a great Maiden track all around. And I think that kind of solidified that whole, being a Maiden fan. And since then, I've been a huge fan, so I think maybe I'll have some interesting perspectives on the new album from a compositional standpoint. But yeah, before that, I had played drums in metal bands for most of my life. The film scoring thing is pretty, I've probably been doing that for like 10 years maybe a little longer actually now, but I would say most of my life I've been more of like a metal drummer. So I think I'm in a good position to kind of evaluate the new album, or at least give my opinion on it. Of course, these are all subjective opinions, but I've been listening to them for so long, and I have to say I'm pretty impressed with the new album. Not to give away my review, but the Book of Souls kind of didn't really do it for me. It felt long-winded, and some of it kind of felt derivative. Not to say it's not a good album, but I think this new one is much stronger, so yeah, let's get into it. Senjutsu is the 17th album by Iron Maiden, produced by Kevin Shirley and co-produced by Steve Harris. So let's get into it. It's quite a long album. It's a double album, so there are 10 tracks on the album. And something to note is that Dave Murray did not contribute to the writing in this album, which he doesn't normally. He usually writes 1 or 2 tracks per album, so it is kind of unusual that he didn't write anything for this album. Also, this album was recorded in 2019, I believe, so they've been kind of sitting on this for a while, because when the pandemic hit, they didn't want to release it then because they wouldn't be able to tour on it. So I think they had to kind of wait a couple years for it to come out. So there's some great Smith Dickinson tracks on this album. So that's always a great writing team, in my opinion. Of course, you have Harris's great work as well. But I think, to me, the highlight is some of the work by Smith and Dickinson on this. So the title track, Senjutsu, was inspired by the Daiko drumming of Japan, which I've actually seen the ensemble Kodo live, and it's pretty amazing. They're very, these giant drums, and the sound is super epic. So I think it's kind of a great way to start the album. It was written by Smith and Harris, and Adrian said he was inspired by those drums. So you definitely get that. And it's kind of like the track is not so much like an up-tempo track, but more like medium-tempo, kind of brooding track, with this tom rock that you don't hear a lot from Nico. So it was kind of refreshing to hear them start with something like this. A little bit kind of unique for Iron Maiden, I think, hearing that this feel of this. There's also some interesting engineering choices. There's a lot of phaser on this album, and particularly in this track for the guitar solos. I think Dave Murray's solo has that phaser sound. I know he does use the Phase 90 MXR, and you hear that a lot, especially live, but he's kind of over the top on this, which is kind of cool. So it's a different timbre we're getting in the guitar solo. Bruce's voice sounds really solid throughout, and there's a lot of actually vocal harmonies on this album, and particularly in this track, we have some of that. Really great song structure on this one. So yeah, a lot of vocal layering. There's a key modulation at the end. I think goes up a whole step, but it reminds me a lot of To Tame a Land. And I'm actually getting that vibe in a lot of these tracks on this album, which that's one of my favorite deep tracks, which they rarely play live. But yeah, I kind of get that feeling at the end of this track. So yeah, it's a good opener, but not sort of, it's not like that Aces High kind of like really bombastic kind of opening, but more of a brooding, mid-tempo drum groove kind of thing. So it feels very organic, this song. You can kind of tell that they maybe put this together in the studio more. I mean, that's how they approach all this stuff. They'll take some ideas into the studio and then develop them. So for the first track, I would say it's an above average Maiden track. So I don't want to talk too much about a rating system, but I put this around maybe like 7 out of 10, like as far as like if you're going to rate it, which, but I like to hear everyone else's opinion on this, and I'm curious to what people thought of it, of each of these tracks. So make sure you comment below and maybe give an order of what your best to worst tracks are. But I think all these songs to me are kind of above average, so it's a pretty strong album. So the second track is Stratego, which was one of the singles they released before the album came out. And to me, it wasn't as good as Writing on the Wall. I mean, some people like it better, but I kind of liked that the Writing on the Wall was a little different for them, the sound of that, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But this is the typical kind of up-tempo gallop. What they do a lot on this album, which I'm kind of on the fence about, is they double the vocal line a lot with the guitar. And I don't know if it's to support the vocals more or not, but it kind of gets a little bit too much at times. So they do that on this. Nico sounds awesome on this track, so I was psyched about that as a drummer. I mean, the whole album, his groove and everything, it really like is, he's got like a deeper pocket in this for some reason. Like, yeah, just his feel is really good on this album. It kind of like really adds to it, and we'll talk more about the highlights as far as for Nico. There's a cool line on this after the guitar solo that's kind of Eastern sounding, and then you have that kind of anthemic chorus. So this song was kind of, it's a shorter track for the album. It's kind of like the standard Maiden fare. So for me, it's a little weaker than the other tracks on the album. I would say this is probably the weakest track for me on the album, and I'm sure a lot of people may disagree with this, but that's my opinion anyway. And this was written by Yannick and Harris, so Gers and Harris, so, and they've written a lot together. And it seems whenever they're writing together, they get into this kind of Eastern vibe. So that's kind of interesting. I think they kind of, Yannick kind of goes there a lot with his writing, which is cool. And you hear that more later on in the album too. So the third track is the first single that dropped, The Writing on the Wall, written by Smith and Dickinson. So we got that combination here. And I really, at first when this track came out, it was kind of unusual, but it kind of grew on me, and I really, really liked the vibe of it. A lot of people have mentioned it sounds like an Old West kind of thing. I guess like that Morricone type thing, but they talked a lot about it, and Smith said it's more folky kind of influence, which I can hear when you listen to it from that perspective. But it's really like fresh sounding for Maiden, which is cool because this late in their career, I think it's nice they're injecting some interesting things on this. And that's kind of, this whole album has a couple moments where you're like, it's kind of sounding very fresh. And I think it's kind of, for the band too, I think it's kind of reinvigorated them. So this is kind of one of those tracks. As far as, for some reason on this track, like the vocal production, it's a little, and I've heard other people say this, it's kind of like a muffled sound. And in general, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but I'm not crazy about Shirley's production, especially on the voice. Whatever he does with Bruce's vocal is it's sometimes it's like too dry or like lackluster production wise, not the performance, but so I prefer kind of the earlier albums for the sound of his voice. But Bruce himself sounds great, so that's after the chorus on this is a great like drum and I noticed this more when I listened to it repeatedly because I had to go through this a couple times to really get the feel of it, and because it's kind of there's a lot to process with this album, but there's a cool bass and drum part with the ride cymbals on the offbeats, and Steve's doing a counter melody on the bass, so that happens after the chorus. There's just like nice attention to detail when you listen to the album. And then to me, like the highlight maybe on the album for Adrian is a solo in this, because it's a pretty extended solo and he just like really nails it, and it's just really a great solo, very like emotionally charged too. So yeah, that was for if we're going to talk about the highlights of like playing wise, like this for me is his solo on this is probably a highlight for him for the album. So track 4, Lost in a Lost World. So this is definitely the big surprise of the album, because, and I've heard other people mention this, and it's really true. At the beginning, we have this like acoustic thing with strings behind it, and there's a vocal stuff that's kind of like, not whispered, but he's kind of toned down. But it's got a very sort of spacey, psychedelic vibe, and I'm really getting that like Nights in White Satin from the Moody Blues, and a lot of people have said that, and it's definitely sort of sounds like that. And I think even the band mentioned that. So that's like the intro and outro. You know, you don't expect to hear that when you put a Maiden album on. So I think it's nice that they're trying different things and going to those kind of areas. And then, of course, it kind of gets heavier. And then we come back to that at the end. But I think when you hear this intro, you're going to be pretty, it's pretty like shocking, really. So they're bringing in different colors, different atmospheres on this album, which I really appreciate. They're not just sort of rehashing the typical Maiden stuff, which we all love anyway, but it's nice that they're kind of pushing it a little bit and getting to different areas as musicians and composers. I like this song a lot. It's kind of higher up there for me as far as like the rating wise, if I were to rate it. So when the drums kick in, they go into this phrasing of 3-3-3-3-2-2, which is like that, which is kind of a really like driving rhythm, and you hear that a lot in like trailers and like film stuff. If we talk from like a film perspective, especially like a trailer, you hear a lot for like action sequences, kind of builds that tension. So very like cinematic and dramatic. Once again, they double the vocals with the guitar on this one, which, like I said, it kind of wears thin as the album goes on, for me. I mean, maybe other people like it, but it's an interesting timbre, but like sometimes I feel like it's fighting with each other. There's a nice time shift in this in the chorus, and then there's some proggy lines that happen like midway through in the middle section. They're proggy, but they also kind of reminded me of Di'Anno era Maiden, like Phantom of the Opera type, like proggy lines. So that was kind of cool to hear. And it comes out of, it's very surprising when it comes on. So I like this track a lot. There's a lot going on in this track. A lot of like, it takes you on a journey for sure. And there's a great Murray and Smith trading solo at the end here. And then in the outro, they go back to that intro Moody Blues type thing, but with added guitar atmosphere in this whole album. Actually, there's some really nice guitar, not so much like shredding, but like cool atmosphere as far as like the harmony and things like that. So I really appreciate that, once again, that attention to detail with the guitars and using it more like harmonically and more sonically, like atmospheric. So definitely, this is a great track. For me, this is one of the high points of the album. because it's surprising and they're kind of covering different ground and really nice contrasting elements in this track. Okay, so track 5 is Days of Future Past. It's another Smith Dickinson song. So this is kind of more up tempo. There's actually a great riff at the beginning that Adrian Smith plays. It has ninths in the chords, so he's using some different harmonies there. Probably this could be like a good concert opener, so we'll see what they open with when they play live. But this kind of has that up tempo, real driving thing. There's a great guitar solo on this and some really interesting chord progression behind the solo, which you don't hear that a lot with Maiden. You know, usually the guitar solos are that standard, you know, flat 6, flat 7, 1 kind of thing, or something based on that. But this kind of had some interesting twists and turns, which I appreciate. So you can see Adrian's trying some different things. After the solo to the chorus, though, was a little awkward for me. It felt kind of forced. So I would have liked to hear more of a transition there, personally. I mean, this is my opinion, but maybe they could have worked on the transition a bit. I mean, I don't know how they're in the studio, like, throwing this together, but it just felt a little awkward for me, but that's just me. But there's a great intro and outro in this song too. Very reminiscent of Smith's sort of haunting kind of intro outros like Passchendaele, Wasted Years. So it kind of had that mood to it. Not so much the tapping, but the atmosphere of it. So it's a good track. I mean, better than average. Didn't really... I think for the Smith Dickinson tracks, it's not my favorite. There's other ones I like better on this album, but still really strong nonetheless. And I think for me, the Smith Dickinson tracks on this album are kind of the highlights. Okay, so the next song is by Gers and Harris. It's called The Time Machine. So this is track 6. And I actually really like what Gers does on this. He kind of experiments with not experiments, but he's using that kind of Dorian sound with the raised third. So you hear this a lot, where it's like that kind of the beginning of the scale is major, and then it goes to like, it has like the minor 6 in there as you go up. So this was popularized by like Seal and stuff, and it's been used a lot. In fact, Iron Maiden's used it before, and they had an acoustic song. I forget what album that is. Maybe you can comment down below. Where it was all acoustic, and they kind of used it in that. But anyway, it's a really cool sound, but he doesn't stay within that, which is interesting. He goes to like an F major chorus, so it kind of moves around. So that's interesting. So there's a lot of color contrast, I would say, with this for the album, because it's outside the harmonic areas of this album, so it stands out that way. So I really like this song. I appreciate that they did some different stuff harmonically. He has an up-tempo middle section. It takes a left turn with these proggy like time changes before and during the solo section. So there's some interesting twists and turns in this. I would say it's really one of the more ambitious tracks for Yannick. He seems to be getting better as a composer, or just like going deeper into it. So I like this track. And the intro and outro kind of reminded me of The Talisman from The Final Frontier, which I'm pretty sure he wrote. I could be wrong, but it has that, it evokes that feeling for me. Darkest Hour by Smith and Dickinson. Easily the best song on the album. I mean, that's my opinion, but it's definitely, they really got through interesting places with this. And I think especially the lyrics, combination of the lyrics and Smith's songwriting really hit the mark on this one. It has a great dramatic, almost Baroque intro, so it has like almost like a neoclassical vibe, but a haunting. He stays on this one pattern, and it's kind of that haunting thing that Smith does for the intros. And then it kicks in with this really kind of a ballady sound, but not a romantic ballad, but more like this very like slower tempo but deep feeling, very moving lyrics. And the chorus, it's the best chorus on the album for me, because it's really interesting, because a lot of their choruses unfortunately have that same anthemic sound. This is more like, there's something unique about this chorus, the progression, the chord progression, and just the way the melody is sculpted over it. Yeah, I think it's, for me, it's the best song on the album. It's the highlight of the album. And also because it's like, once again, it's like an area that they haven't really explored as much. So we have that element too. And then there's this descending chromatic line in the chorus section too. So it's something different. That's what I mean about the chorus. It's kind of not your typical Iron Maiden chord progression for the chorus. So this just feels really well crafted, this song, and definitely highlight for the album. And the Smith and Murray solos in the middle are just incredible. Yeah, it's just like vintage Smith and Murray, and just like the best elements of that. I'm pretty sure it's them. I mean, I think by this point I can kind of tell their style. Yeah, so for me, like, this is the highlight of the album. And I love to know what everyone else thinks. Like, was this the highlight for you? What's your favorite song on the album? Make sure you comment below. I'd love to know what other fans think of all these songs. But to me, this really stood out and was really like a great moment in the album. Really moving, really evocative. So yeah, I really, really like this track. Okay, so now we come to the 3 longer epic Harris tracks. So track 8 is Death of the Celts, or if you're in New England you say Celts because of Celtics. But anyway, this has a really cool bass intro, and it sounds to me like it's one of those acoustic electric basses. I could be wrong, but it has a different timbre. So either they did something different with the EQ, or they're using that electric acoustic bass, which I've seen them use in that Journeyman song. Was that the name of it? I think that's the one I was trying to think of before. So this one we got this real like Celtic vibe too, you know, that Harris likes been going to a lot for the modern kind of Maiden sound. Really, I mean, all of Maiden has that influence, which makes sense regionally. So it's got that after the intro, this 12/8 feel kicks in, like that that kind of typical Maiden 12/8 thing for the verse. Really like heavy plodding track. Kind of like a mid-tempo 12/8 until it picks up later on. Has a great solo section. Then they go into a double time, which is, I guess, more like 6/8 kind of time. There's some cool proggy bass and guitar runs where they play in unison in the middle of the track. So there's like some twists and turns in this song. That almost reminded me of like Yes or something. It has that intricate lines, but in unison. For me, this is, I mean, the final 3 tracks for me are like highlight Nico. Definitely like the rhythm section is highlighted. So he sounds great on this track. A lot of like interesting fills. And then at the end, Bruce sounds great on this too. And at the end, he has almost this fragile sound, which really is like emotional. And I just love how at the end, he got to this kind of fragile place as a vocalist, which you don't really see that from him. So it was kind of a very nice like tone painting kind of thing, and was a great sort of atmosphere, a great place for him to go to at the end of this track with the lyrics and everything. Yeah, so I just love how Bruce goes to that sort of fragile kind of place vocally, where it's more like, not fragile, but like more intimate, rather than this grandiose sort of dramatic thing that he usually does. There's a lot of, I appreciate that about this album too, is Bruce kind of is more a dynamic performance from him. You know, we have the very Bruce kind of heavy stuff, but then we have the more subdued emotional content too, which is cool. So I feel like he's really stretching out more in this album. I mean, he did a little of that in the Book of Souls. I think it's even explored further in this album and utilized. So I appreciate that in his performance especially. Track 9, The Parchment. So yeah, another Harris jam. These are getting longer. It's like 10 minutes, 11 minutes, and 12 minutes or something like that. But once again, he's starting with this bass intro. And this one has this Mid-Eastern vibe to it. Then he goes to this mid-tempo galloping rhythm. And then after that, we have this, I mean, the mid-tempo gallop is it's like a heavy drum groove in this one. Nico's foot really sounds awesome in this, just like that. The gallop, a kind of mid-tempo, more grooving. So like the feel on this one really stood out to me as a drummer, especially. Like Nico is really locked into this feel on this. It's just great. And I also got that To Tame a Land vibe again on this, when the guitar was doubling the vocal. It has that modulation, like a minor and then up like a whole step. So I always love that. I mentioned this before, but To Tame a Land, I like where they got to that. And he seems to be drawing from that a lot in this album, that feeling and that harmonic universe or whatever. Harmonic language, I should say. So yeah, on this track though, I noticed that guitar doubling the vocal, it kind of wears thin for me at this point of the album, especially as a device. So they could have maybe used that more sparingly. I mean, that's my opinion, but sometimes I just want to hear Bruce and not the combination of the two timbres. Then this felt towards like 3/4 of the way through, it kind of felt a little long-winded to me, this track. And then this double time thing kicks in kind of out of nowhere, and just, I don't know, it felt forced a little bit for me. And then at the end though, we have the line that reminded me of like Thin Lizzy or something, like Emerald or something like that. And that definitely Steve Harris was influenced by the Thin Lizzy stuff, so it's kind of coming out here for me at the end. All in all, it's a really good track. I mean, probably the best Harris track on the album for these final three, for me, was my favorite one. But yeah, all in all, I really kind of like the feel of it, especially. So to me, Nico kind of made this song with this great feel for the rhythm section. Okay, so the final track number 10, is Hell on Earth, another Harris track. So we have this bass and keyboard intro, this climbing progression, some nice guitar textures over the top, really cool atmosphere. And then this mid-gallop kind of kicks in really abruptly for me. Kind of felt, I mean, it's cool because it's like surprising. And as a film composer especially, I kind of appreciate that. So, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it as like, I mean, do you want this transition or do we just jump right in? And, you can approach it in different ways. But this, I don't know why, but this particularly felt kind of abrupt to me. And then this has a really long instrumental intro, like maybe like almost 4 minutes before the vocals kick in. So then we have, once again, the guitar doubling the vocal, which, how I feel about that. But Nico's foot on this is like absolutely flying, which is cool. So he's got the fast, I mean, he hasn't lost anything, which is amazing. I mean, just for him to play at this level at his age is pretty amazing, It's just a great drum album. I mean, I talked about a little of the drumming, but I think like it's really, really great drumming on this album, especially this track. Like I said, these last three tracks, Nico really shines, I think. And then we have another time change later on, but that also felt a little abrupt to me. Yeah, this wasn't my favorite of the Harris tracks. Probably my least favorite, actually. And then the outro is the intro returning again. So I really liked the intro to this. I mean, I liked all the parts individually. I just felt like they didn't, I don't know how well they fit together, or it could have been worked out more, maybe. So that wasn't my favorite of the Harris tracks. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like which of these epic tracks you like the best. For me, like I said, it was the Parchment was my favorite of the Harris tracks. Although I also liked Death of the Celts too, but I think if I were to have to decide, I would say the Parchment edged it out by a little bit. It's a long album. It took me a while to digest it, and kind of like the Book of Souls, but that's the thing too. I felt like it was more effective though as a double album, the flow of it, than the Book of Souls. It didn't feel, there's a lot to digest, but it didn't feel as long as Book of Souls felt for some reason. So I kind of like this one a lot better actually. And I think in terms of like the newer Maiden, this is probably the best album, aside from my favorite before this was probably Matter of Life and Death. Just because you have like The Longest Day and Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, which those two tracks alone like make that one of the better modern Maiden albums. But yeah, aside from that, I think this is probably my favorite of the newer, after the reunion kind of thing, albums. So yeah, that's my review. I hope you guys found that interesting, and I'd love to hear, I'd love to get a discussion going about what you guys thought of the album. I'm really excited to see them again, so hopefully you know, once we get through this pandemic stuff, we can all hang out at Maiden together, you know. All in all, I think it's a great album, and I'm really impressed with it, and especially this, for me, the highlight, like I said, with the Smith Dickinson tracks. So I think those are really great. So I guess if I were to have to put a rating on this, out of 10, what would I give it? I mean, you have to figure 9 and 10 are like Power Slave and Somewhere in Time, like, so it's not on that level, but definitely a solid like 7.5 or 8, you know. So it's up there, but we can't put it in the 9 or 10 spot because those other albums obviously are, for me, I don't know. So let me know what you guys think as far as like ratings. I mean, if you had to rate it, I mean, I hate rating things with numbers, but like, you know, just if you were to put it in their catalog, how would you rate it? You know, that's kind of, where does it sit in terms of their entire output, you know? But definitely for the modern stuff, it's pretty high up there for after the reunion, after like Brave New World on, you know. Okay, well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really like doing this. It was a lot of fun because, like I said, I'm a big Maiden fan, and it was just really fun listening to the album and kind of taking notes on it, and, you know, coming at it maybe more from a compositional standpoint. All right, we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks. Bye.